There we go. We're now recording this session. Welcome, everyone. This is also an opportunity to go ahead and pose a question in the chat box that you would like our speakers or our community to address. Great to have you all here. We have over 200 people registered for today's webinar. And we're really grateful for your time and attention at this really critical moment. Uh, this webinar is produced by this really great group of capacity builders, including our community foundations, both Santa Barbara Foundation and the Ventura County Community Foundation, the McCune Foundation, the Fund for Santa Barbara, and the Center for Nonprofit Leadership. We're really delighted to have you all here today. We're going to get started in just a quick moment with some opening remarks. And we will have a slide deck that hopefully we can share after this session, and we'll definitely get the recording out to everyone after the event. There will be limitations to the kind of like scope of some of the questions, particularly if they veer into more legal advice. So just be mindful that there might be questions that Brian Gerard is not able to address in an open format, and we'll be flagging those. But just go ahead and drop your questions in the chat box as we get started. And welcome, everybody. It's great to see you all. And I am going to go ahead now and turn it over to Jackie Kerr, the CEO of our Santa Barbara Foundation. Jackie?
Okay, thank you, Dina. Well, first of all, I want to say a warm welcome to so many of the nonprofit leaders who are on the call today. Just scanning through this list is incredibly impressive, but also moving. Just to see how many of you took the time to register for today's event, and knowing what a critical time this is. As Dina said, it's a hard time. How busy everyone is, trying to stay more connected than usual to our clients and people in our service areas and our communities. And it just demonstrates that just the large number that's here today really demonstrates to me, and to all of us, and it reinforces that we're so always impressed with each of you and your organizations and what you do every day, but even more so in times like this, how you really lean in and go above and beyond to participate in events like this to make sure that you are maximizing every opportunity you can to serve your communities. So thank you so much for your participation. I really want to recognize my colleagues who produced this event today, especially Dina and the Center for Nonprofit Leadership, Claudia, you're going to hear from in a minute, McCune Foundation, the Fund for Santa Barbara, and Kathleen you'll hear from, and definitely my colleague to the south and Ventura Community Foundation, Vanessa Bechtel. I will say some more words about the senator in a minute, but I do want to, before I do that, recognize the Attorney General's office. I have the great pleasure of an opportunity to work with attorney generals in several states, and fortunately, all for good reasons. But I know how busy that office is, how many things fall under your purview. And so, Brian, to have you here today to share your advice and help our organizations become as effective as possible, we're just so grateful that you're willing to spend your time that way. So thank you, Brian, for being here with us. I will, before the senator comes on, I'll just say it has been a challenging budget year, not news to any of you. And there are years when we go and work with the senator and our assembly members, and we have these great conversations about all the things we're going to do with resources that may or may not be available to us, but we have great hopes. This year was very different. There weren't as many hopes about things we could do with those resources because they weren't there. And so I just wanted to acknowledge the senator because she met with, I know many of you, she's met with us and puts her thinking cap on and really creates these opportunities for dialogue so we can brainstorm about creative ways to still meet the needs of our community in the face of challenging times like this. So recognizing that, it's no surprise that she was selected by her peers to be the next Senate pro tem, President pro tem. We're so excited about that. I think you all know she was when she was on the Assembly side, she took the lead on creating the committee on nonprofits, the Select Committee on Nonprofits. Now our Assemblymember Hart is leading that on the House side. Senator Limón has done an incredible service to the nonprofit community because she continues to speak for us to really get into the weeds of what we're doing, to learn how she can work with, bolster, and make the most of the nonprofit sector so that we can and she can serve her district and our neighbors and residents in our districts and our areas. So grateful to her for that. And then I just want to say it's going to be a great conversation because this panel has put together a series of both information for the sector to learn from, but also an opportunity for dialogue and ask questions about how we can help, how we can lean in to help our communities even more than we are now. And so there's going to be a great dialogue, and I'm so grateful to the senators and Matthew Livers. I saw you here. Thank you for being here and for all you do. And we're looking forward to that dialogue and that conversation. So thank you, and I will turn it over to my colleague Vanessa Bechtel, who's not in a coffee shop in France, though she may look like she is. She's actually in another location here in Santa Barbara.
Thank you so much, Jackie. I am in between appointments. I know all of us have been running to do all we can right now, and I know it's been the same. But I'm actually in your neck of the woods. I just came from a meeting, and so I'm looking forward to catching up. But thank you. I have to say personally, I've never seen the more brave, courageous, compassionate, collaborative, heroic work that I've been seeing in our nonprofit sector and in our organizations throughout our region. I'm so proud to be part of our nonprofit community. I am so proud of the leadership that I'm seeing. I mean, just the stories. I just got off the phone with one of our higher education leaders, and just the work that is happening right now is so important. And we may not all get to see it, which is why I think moments like this that bring us together, that give us an opportunity to really have authentic connection and really share what's going on, because some of the work that's happening behind the scenes on the ground is just unbelievable. And I'm so proud. And I also know that we're all stretching ourselves to really meet this moment and to really help amplify that. I think that gatherings like this are more essential than ever before. So I just want to share, I have no idea how terrible my internet connection is, but I did everything possible to make this moment to be with you. And Dina, obviously the Center for Nonprofit Leadership continues to bring us together in ways that, are just gifts to the field. So I just want to say thank you to my colleagues. Thank you to Senator Limón. Thank you to the Attorney General's office, and my board, my team. Obviously, I'm so proud of everybody, but we need to help each other see what's happening, because I think that's what fuels me, that gives me hope. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Vanessa. So I'm now going to turn it over to Claudia Armand. I think if we represent anything, it's how powerful it can be to be in collaboration and community and partnership. And Claudia, you brought this band of capacity builders and nonprofiteers together to host today. So thank you for that opportunity, and thank you for everything that the McCune Foundation does on behalf of our field. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Hello, everybody. It's just wonderful to see so many of you who are working so hard in the community take time during your lunch break to join us today. I'm the Executive Director of the McCune Foundation. We support community organizing on the Central Coast, And our grantees are no strangers to organizing and advocacy. But now more than ever, it's important that all nonprofits embrace those skills. So thank you for making the time today. I want to thank Senator Monique Limón for suggesting this webinar. Monique has been on the board of the McCune Foundation for a number of years, and when our board was meeting in April, she said, we need to have a webinar to talk about what organizations can do, how they can raise their voice at this and at these dark times, right? And so she suggested that we host this webinar, and we reached out to our partners, and everybody from Santa Barbara Foundation, Ventura County Community Foundation, Fund for Santa Barbara, Center for Nonprofit Leaderships jumped in and said, yes, let's do this together. So thank you for that collaboration. Senator Limón, as most of you know, hails from Santa Barbara and represents many communities across the Central Coast. She is now the President Pro Tem of the California Senate. She has been involved with the nonprofit sector for many years, and she founded the Senate Select Committee on the nonprofit sector. Senator Limón, as I mentioned, has been a longtime board member of McCune Foundation, and so she has been following very closely the many challenges that nonprofit organizations are facing. And we appreciate the work that you're all doing. We know you're facing extraordinarily challenging times, and I think it's just so critical that our local leaders in our community are on our side, and they are our allies, because that cannot be said for every community in this country. But here locally, our leaders have our backs. They're connected to the community. They're thinking about what the organizations are struggling with. And so they're an important voice for us at this time. Has the senator joined the call? Okay, we'll turn it over to Senator Monique Limón. Thank you so much for making your time available to us.
Thank you, Claudia. I want to welcome everyone and thank you all for your interest in this important webinar and for joining the important conversation on nonprofit advocacy. A special thanks to the McCune Foundation, the Fund for Santa Barbara Foundation, the Center for Nonprofit Leadership, and the Ventura County Community Foundation for helping organize this vital discussion. I also want to do a shout out to our Attorney General's office for providing their professional legal insight on this particular topic. As you all know, this is an incredibly consequential conversation and also moment in time. This issue that we're covering in terms of thinking about advocacy is an issue that impacts policy and, of course, the budgetary climate, where nonprofits have worked diligently for our communities and also to provide needed services with sometimes less resources and less partners in government. Seeing the difficulties grow in real time, I've worked to bring focus to many of the challenges that we face as a nonprofit sector, and will continue to do that and find ways that we can do that specifically at the state level. It's also very important that all nonprofits know that you do have a power and that what you are capable of doing and advocating for yourself on a policy and budgetary front. I think it's important that nonprofits know that we're able to do and to work what you're able to do and also what you're able to do within the legal parameters in terms of advocacy and lobbying with elected officials. Advocacy and lobbying are not the same thing. Some are allowed, some are not allowed. And we hear this all the time, especially on the ground. I hear folks believe that they can't be advocates. Folks hesitate to speak on a policy issue or on a budget issue that impacts them. And so I think that the answers are more nuanced than just a simple yes and no. And my concern has at times been that more nonprofits, hesitate from chiming in on policy and on budget issues and confuse policy and budget with politics. Those are separate buckets, and we want to make sure that you have at least the legal understanding from our attorney general's perspective, and of course from their expertise in terms of what you can or can't do. And in these uncertain times, it's really more important than ever. Knowing that government will not be able to do it all, knowing that there's a shift in who the government partners are on some of the issues, and also knowing that our communities are very vulnerable in this time. Over the past years, our legislature has founded and has a history of supporting nonprofits. Many of you have heard of the select committees that we started in the legislature. These are committees that are tasked with researching, exploring the needs of the nonprofit sector, also recognizing the nonprofit sector altogether, and even creating policy. The state legislature has continued to bring, I think, needed attention to the sector. I was fortunate to be able to start this nonprofit select committee when I was in the assembly, and then start a select committee when I got to the Senate, so that both houses are able to really look at the nonprofit sector through a policy and budget lens, as well as a partner lens. In 2024, the last time that the committee had a robust conversation on a policy issue was in 2024, when we really looked at increasing the collaboration between nonprofit and state entities. We discussed the role of the Attorney General's office and improvement to the registry of charities and fundraisers, along with the implementation of nonprofit-related legislation regarding advance payments and grant making. So as you can see, we're focused on some of the issues that you're all facing. Now, while the select committee and the work of the legislature is policy and budget driven, we also take a moment to recognize our nonprofits. And over the past few years, we have recognized different nonprofits as Nonprofits of the Year. And this has been a 10-year effort in partnership with Cal Nonprofits. Cal Nonprofits is an incredible partner to us in the legislature. I hope you know that they are your formal advocacy organization, and I hope you're all connected and involved with them, because they do an incredible job. Since we started Nonprofit of the Year, California has honored 1,009 nonprofits in our state and all 58 counties. And so I'm very proud of that work, and just ensuring that the legislature sees the array of services and programs that are provided in our nonprofit sector. In terms of the select committee, I also know that we've worked on developing recommendations. We've previously had hearings that have resulted in members and the legislatures preparing a robust bill package. A few years ago, we called that bill package the Nonprofit Equity Initiative. It was aimed at addressing numerous challenges facing the sector. The legislature partnered again with Cal Nonprofits, and we were able to inform and introduce bills related to Prompt Payment Act, advance payments, and indirect cost reimbursement, among other items. Certainly, this is a package that is still going. We were successful in getting a couple through the finish line, but not all. I was proud in the past to also use this experience of working with you all in the nonprofit sector and really hearing from you to establish the California Grants Portal, providing a one-stop shop for available grants that can be used by the nonprofits to find funding. And that's something that came directly from you. Going into the community, I was constantly asked, where can nonprofits find funding? And I had to create a bill to create this portal and get support from it. So as we think of the different ways that California has been working with you as nonprofits, I also want to recognize that this is an uncertain time. And certainly we know that what is happening and the changes that we're seeing at the federal level are having an impact, not just at the state, but certainly on so many of you and the work that you're doing. We believe, and we're following and tracking the legislation that was just passed at the federal level, and legislation that will certainly have an impact on issues related to taxes, to health and human services, to Social Security, energy policy, and including, you know, many of the pieces of legislation and policy issues that hit all of us. And so what that means for us is that as we are looking to ways that we can partner with each other, we're also recognizing that for many, they're losing in our communities, they're losing trust in some form of government. And so the work that you do is not only important because of the programs and services you do, but because you continue to be trusted messengers. We have seen this time and time again. You are on the ground working with our community, and your trusted message, I think, goes a long way in terms of helping our community identify needs and also solutions during these uncertain times. The state budget is certainly something that is on our mind. It is probably the #1 issue we are dealing with this year, but also will be the top issue or a top issue that we're dealing with next year, in particular because our state was already facing tough budget times, but with some of the changes happening at the federal level, those times are going to get significantly tougher. We've been able to provide some bridge funding, but it is just not enough. And that's something that I think we want to make sure you all know, that it is still our hope to be able to provide services and programs to be able to fund through the state budget different entities. But these are also concerning times, as we know that our vulnerable communities are facing the worst of both the federal changes and also the state changes that you're seeing come through. And that's something that we as state legislators are doing our absolute best to think about ways to lessen the cuts, but also recognizing that in a world of tough budget times and economy that is starting to see some signs of concern, as well as the federal major cuts. We are certainly looking to continue to work with you all on how we can get through this particular moment. I do want to recognize that the one thing that we have been able to do is keep the state nonprofit security grant program. And that's something that we have fought to keep at least in this year's budget. I am so grateful to all of you for coming together, for participating, for hearing from our Attorney General's office in terms of the do's and don'ts on budget policy advocacy. Our ask is not, for political advocacy. It is really to focus here on policy and budget as it relates to impacts that you will see for programs and for services in our state. Thank you all so much for what you do. You do an incredible job. It has only gotten harder, and we only need you more than we needed you before. I think that the Central Coast is incredibly lucky and grateful to have all of you doing this work, but please know that on my end, there is a major recognition about how hard it is for you, because we're feeling that challenge here at the state level as well. But also, we want to work with you all. We want to be able to partner. As Claudia mentioned, I think that the state legislature is, we're your representatives, but additionally, we are really thinking about, again, all of our state, the Central Coast. We have a Central Coast caucus that is thinking about what's happening along the Central Coast. And in this new role that I haven't actually yet taken, I'm elect right now. I'm the leader of the Senate elect. But in this new role, it's something that we're going to need to do and work together with as we get to 2026, because we do believe 2026 can pose a more challenging year. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to the Department of Justice Attorney General's office for the information that you're going to be sharing with us today. But more than anything, thank you for being here.
Senator Limón, we have a team monitoring the chat box for questions. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to that team to get some conversations. I will just note that we're going to send our senator back to work right after this, her remarks. So this is your opportunity right now. I strongly encourage folks to accept the invitation to partner with the senator's office, and thank you very much for your leadership. There's never a doubt that we have a nonprofit champion in Sacramento and beyond. So
Thank you.
I'm just going to ask Anne and Kathleen and Stacy it- to jump in.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah,
Hi.
thank you so much.
Yeah. I can introduce myself. I'm Ann Watley, and I am the Director of the Collaboration for Social Impact at the Santa Barbara Foundation. And I've got my colleague at the Fund for Santa Barbara, Kathleen. And we are welcoming questions now for Senator Limón, and we will also have some question time after the Attorney General speaks. And so we can kick things off with I think we've got a few questions that have come through, but I'll just do a starter that's really, I think it's an opening for you to continue your statement around advice that you have for nonprofits that are facing potential loss of funding, or they see legislation that would really impact their clients. So what are suggestions for ways to let policymakers know about how these changes will impact their communities?
I think there's different buckets, and that's one of the important pieces, that at the local level, whether that's a city grant or, you know, a county grant, and at the state level, and then the federal level, these are three different buckets in terms of advocacy. I would say that at the state level, it's really important that as you're watching the budget, as you're watching the bills, I'm going to take a wild guess that the budget is probably having more of an impact than the bills that are going through the California legislature on funding, that you let us know what is important. One of the challenges that I have seen is very often many nonprofits come to us with different priorities. And so you have the sector as a whole sometimes has a hard time finding the one or two priorities. In a world where there's really tough budget times, I really think that having one or two priorities at the most is your biggest key to success. We want to be able to fund as much as we can, but our funds are also limited. The general fund for the state of California is also being strained, in particular by the funding cuts that are happening at the national level, at the federal level. Certainly you've seen a drop. We've had major fires in California that have impacted our tax system. So these are all things that you've seen on and off, but I would say really trying to identify what your priority is and letting us know, letting your state representatives know as we consider budget priorities, what are the things that you feel are a priority or elements that we should keep in, you know, on our minds as we're making these very difficult decisions. Additionally, I mentioned Cal nonprofits. You know, everyone's capacity to be part of Cal nonprofits, it's different, but I will tell you that so often we rely on them to help us speak for the sector. If you are not one of the voices influencing how they speak for the sector, your voice then is kind of outside of the process and doesn't speak with the same, I think, momentum or force that Cal Nonprofits has. And there's many reasons, right, why folks can be part of an association or not be part of an association, but I do want to make sure that you know that Cal Nonprofits, it's doing some high level work there. I think along the Central Coast, you know, many of you know Jeff Green, who leads that. And so very involved, you know, in that particular space. I also think that it's important to find ways where we can partner. It is going to be very difficult for us to just find more money. Like, that's just difficult. Most people will tell you that that will be something that they're not going to be able to do. And so what are the places where we can partnership? What does partnership look like? I've had nonprofits come to me say, and you know, we know we can't get X more amount money from you, but putting some flexibility around this reporting or putting some flexibility around these guidelines would be particularly helpful at this moment. And there is the ability at times for legislation, or sometimes it's not legislation. Sometimes it's just, practice with an agency or guidelines with an agency that require some flexibility. And we're very open to hearing that as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Senator Limón, and just for uplifting the incredible work that's going on in the sector and those channels of communication between you and the nonprofit sector. I do want to elevate a participant question that came into the chat that's getting some uplift from other participants. And just considering where we're at as a sector, there's just been certainly quite a lot of challenges. But participant Eric uplifts, amongst all the challenges we face currently, we're agonizing over the risks in publishing DEI language / messaging / content. What protections, if any, can be deployed to shield nonprofits from being penalized for using prohibited language as defined by the federal administration, terms such as equity, diversity, trans, etc.?
Yeah, and so there is a distinction in terms of what funding that is, in terms of state funding, county funding, or federal funding. So I think that your sources of funding do matter. I mean, here in California, I will tell you that, this is part of what we're working with the, Attorney General's office to determine where we need to make changes or not. You've seen some entities in the state of California make changes. As a whole, we have not passed legislation for these changes. I think we're still, as legislators, still very open to talking about these. But if you are receiving direct federal funding, you are probably seeing some of those changes. I think I'm probably going to defer that question because there could be legal implications to our Attorney General's office. Or Department of Justice to maybe guide us through, but I will say that your source of funding does matter. And if it is a source of funding that does not require that change, you're in a different position versus a source of funding that is asking for different changes in that particular funding. And we know that some of this is being contested through the courts.
Great, thank you so much for that. Go ahead, Anne.
Yeah. We've got another question from a participant. Senator Limón, what's happening to protect nonprofits from grants awarded, but then being informed there's no funding available? So is there any protection of funds awarded to not allow them to be terminated, especially as there are some expense reimbursement grants that are now of concern?
At the federal level, we are, I mean, we've been informed of different grants, and honestly, we don't have a way to get them all back. There have been some, I think, legal challenges to some of the funding. At the state level, we are trying our best not to, I mean, this was a big conversation in the legislature during our budget to not pull those grants away. You will see future impacts to those grants, but not, this was like a very big conversation in the legislature to make sure that we're not pulling promised funding away. Again, if it's tied to the federal, we're having a harder time. We just don't have the money for it. So I think knowing your source of funding is really critical, but know that at the state level, it is our intention not to pull it away. And I would say that if you are finding this with state funding you should talk to our office. You should reach out to one of your state representatives and say, hey, we're having a problem with so-and-so agency. Here's what it is. And we could try to get more information for you on what the chances are of either retaining that funding, getting that funding in the future, or what, changes may or may not need to be made depending on that communication. But the state and the legislature have been active in trying to work against this for state funding.
Thank you so much. And I know that you do have to step off in a moment, but we have one last question for you. We're wondering if you have any updates on California legislation that nonprofits may want to be monitoring. For example, SB 627, the No Secret Police Act, and SB 805, the No Vigilantes Act. And I know that there's been helpful page shared, but just, yeah, direct from you, Senator Limón. Thanks.
Yeah, so those two are what we call gut and amends. Those pieces, so the legislative year starts in January, and usually by mid-February is when most members do introductions of their bills. And sometimes there's different life circumstances, community issues that come up. And so people have to take one of their existing bills and do what we call a gut and amend. They take a bill that was working on one thing, and they have to then use it, because you can't introduce new vehicles, you have to use existing vehicles, use it to address a different problem. And so those bills fall under that category, which is a gut and amend. The numbers started as something else. The bill originally did something. And based on what we were seeing, both of those bills, one of them is, I believe, by Senator Wiener, and the other one is by Senator Perez, who have introduced these bills. These bills are currently in the Assembly, and they are as a response to what we have been seeing over the last 6 weeks in California in terms of the raids and some of the deep concerns that members of our community have. Those are bills that have gone through public safety. I believe they got out of public safety yesterday and are now going to the Assembly Appropriations Committee. And so they will go through. All bills have to go through two houses. So they'll go through the Assembly, and then they'll come back to the Senate, and they'll have to go through a process to get the votes. And those two bills are, of course, bills that folks are hearing a lot about. We have over 1,000 bills that are going through the process. In the end will be about September 14th. We'll probably end up with about half of those that either make it or don't make it. But those are two of the bills. The Cal Nonprofits tracks those that are specific to Cal Nonprofits. Probably those two are not in that category because they are kind of considered public safety bills. But if ever you wanted a list of some of the top public safety or environmental policy that is going through the legislature or that has the most robust conversation, you're always welcome to reach out to us. I would say that every policy area has different organizations that track what's most relevant, what's the hottest topic, what's the most controversial topic in that area. But those two are probably public safety bills. And there are many others. Oftentimes you can call our office and say, what are people calling about? And we have examples of what they're calling about. I would say my office has gotten calls about those, but also gotten calls about a lot of other bills in different policy areas, including education, health, consumer protections, energy as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Senator Limón. And thank you so much for joining us today, speaking with members from beautiful, wonderful organizations here on the Central Coast. So wishing you all the best, and thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to head back to vote and in my committee, but I wanted to, again, thank you all for doing this, and thank you for convening to all of, the organizations. I think that this is important, and everybody wants to figure out a way to use our voice in the appropriate legal way. But I also just want to remind all of us we all have a voice, and we do get to use it, and we just have to figure out how to use it in the legal and appropriate ways as a nonprofit sector. So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for caring enough to being here.
Terrific. Now we're going to turn it over to Brian Gerard Armstrong, who's going to join us now. Again, I'm going to make just a quick mention that there may be limitations to the amount of free legal advice that we can ask Brian Gerard for. I'm sure he'll let us know if we're tiptoeing in that direction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'll take my cue from you.
Thank you, Dina. It is such an honor and a privilege to be able to meet with you all today. This is a topic that's very near and dear to me. It involves, well, I think you know what it involves, advocacy. For instance, what is advocacy that a nonprofit can engage in relative to lobbying, or a topic like candidate electioneering or political campaign activity? So, very much excited to talk to you about this. And I do want to say that these legal issues that we're going to be going over they really depend on an organization's tax-exempt status under the Internal Revenue Code. So that's why I'm talking about tax-exempt language. Because ultimately, whether an organization is a nonprofit or not, it depends on their tax-exempt status. Next slide. And I think you heard it before. Just wanted to say that I'm just providing general information for you, and this doesn't constitute legal advice. You are encouraged to seek legal advice for your specific needs. Next slide. Now, if there's any takeaway I feel that you all could take from our time together here, it would be actually this slide. I created it just to provide like a general overview of, things to think about when you're engaging in advocacy, lobbying, or candidate electioneering activity. And I'll go into more detail as to what I mean by those particular terms. And the restrictions or lack of limitations are really dependent on an organization's tax-exempt status. For instance, are they a 501c3 tax-exempt organization versus another one under the Internal Revenue Code, such as 501c4, C5, C6? And then if you are a 501c3 organization, what does your classification say as a public charity or a grant-making private foundation? So when it comes to lobbying, a public charity can lobby. They just need to stay within the limits and report expenditures in their annual reporting. I'll get into more detail on that. But private foundations, they're not able to engage in lobbying, while the other types of 501cs, they can engage in lobbying on an unlimited basis. And I'm talking about here just very generally. I'll touch on candidate electioneering. This is a term that I like to use. It's not necessarily in the Internal Revenue Code, and I'll go into it more, but it's essentially political campaign activity for specific candidates that are running for office. And if you're a public charity or a private foundation, it's just totally prohibited. And if you're another type of 501c organization, then it's okay as long as that's not the organization's primary activity. So it needs to be a secondary activity. But anything else, so anything that's not lobbying as it's defined under the federal tax code, and anything that's not candidate electioneering is considered advocacy. And, there are no limits. So it's just important to know the difference between what is lobbying and what's not lobbying, and what's candidate electioneering and what's not that, and then essentially you can engage in it. Next slide. So let's talk about what lobbying means. I'm going to go over these bullet items on the screen right now. Lobbying means an attempt to influence legislation. And when I say that, I'm talking about at the federal level, state level, municipal level, or even internationally. It just essentially refers to trying to influence how legislators vote on specific legislation. The one thing that's, I think, a little bit tricky when it comes to what lobbying is ballot initiatives, referendums, constitutional amendments, things that are put before the people to vote on. That's actually lobbying as well. So that's actually why I use the term candidate electioneering, which I'll go into later, because when I use the term candidate electioneering, I'm really talking about campaign activity as it relates to candidates that are running for office. But if you're using the term like political campaign activity or something more broad like political activity, it can be confusing as to where these ballot measures, referendums, and similar type initiatives, where they fall into the category. So those would fall under the definition of lobbying. And lobbying, when you're trying to influence how legislators vote, or trying to influence a campaign to defeat an initiative or referendum, that can be done directly with legislators and their staff, or it can be done through what's called grassroots lobbying. So Direct lobbying, again, it occurs specifically with a legislator or their staff. But I also want to point out it needs to contain or reference specific legislation and taking a position on that legislation. So if you're not taking a position on that legislation, you're talking with with a legislator or their staff member, that's not direct lobbying. It's not lobbying. And when we're talking about grassroots, this is when you're encouraging the public at large, other than like, say, your nonprofits members, if you have any, to take action by referring to specific legislation, taking a stand on that legislation, and including a call to action that explicitly or implicitly asks the recipient to contact legislators. So if you're trying to influence the public and there's no call to action, for instance, that's not grassroots lobbying, and I wouldn't worry about it falling under the definition of lobbying. Next slide. Also thought it would be helpful to elaborate on what's not lobbying on this particular slide. It doesn't include attempts to influence administrative agency action, such as, say, like the California Department of Justice when they're promulgating regulations. We're not the legislature, lobbying doesn't happen there. It also is the same for executive actions, say if you're trying to lobby as it relates, excuse me, not lobby, but advocate in terms of, like, say, an executive order that's been issued federally, and it doesn't relate to judicial actions such as litigation. It also doesn't include activities by legislators other than legislating. So again, there needs to be a specific legislation involved to fall under the definition of lobbying. So it's something more general, such as constituent services, just a general complaint that you're providing to the legislator, not specific to specific legislation, that wouldn't be considered lobbying under federal tax law. I do encourage you to seek attorney guidance on these other examples that I'm going through, but when you're examining or discussing broad social, economic, and similar problems, maybe you would call these policy issues, without discussing specific legislation or issuing a call to action. You may remember that term as it relates to grassroots lobbying. It's just not lobbying. Nonpartisan analysis or research that you're doing, that's not lobbying either. And in this type of research or analysis, you should be including enough facts on both sides of whatever you're analyzing so that a reader could reasonably come down on either side. And it shouldn't be containing a call to action, because if it did, then it would look like grassroots lobbying. And if you're providing technical assistance in response to a written request from a legislative body, as opposed to an individual legislator, that's not lobbying as well. And then if for whatever reason you need to defend yourself to protect the organization or nonprofit's tax-exempt status or ability to provide donations that are tax deductible, or the existence of your organization, like say you're subject to an IRS investigation or audit, those types of things would not be considered lobbying as well. Next slide, Dina. And Dina, thank you so much for helping me with the slides. I was having technical difficulties earlier. Greatly appreciate it. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about lobbying by 501c3 organizations, specifically if they're public charities. Public charities can engage in lobbying, such as the direct lobbying and grassroots lobbying that I talked about. It can happen as long as it's not a substantial part of the charity's total activities. And that's a vague description, and I'll get into that later. But right now, I want to focus on the fact that the lobbying that a public charity does engage in, it must be reported as lobbying expenditures on the organization's Form 990 filed with the IRS and with the Registry of Charities and Fundraisers. So here I have screenshots of snippets of an IRS Form 990. There's a particular question in the core form. Part 4, whether it's the 990 or the 990EZ, that specifically asks 501c3 organizations, did you engage in lobbying activities? It goes without saying that if it's yes, you need to be truthful, and then you would need to fill out Schedule C, and that's the schedule that provides more, requests more specific information, such as the data on your lobbying expenditures. Next slide, please. So if a public charity is engaging in lobbying, it's important to train staff and board members on what to track and what to report. For instance, the time that they're spending on the actual lobbying. And then there's 2 ways to calculate the lobbying limit and report the lobbying. So the substantial part method, which I alluded to earlier, there's a particular section on the Form 990 that's specific to this type of method. It's the default method. It really depends on the facts and circumstances, but you just need to provide the information that's requested on the form. And then there's what's called the lobbying expenditures method. And this is where a public charity would elect to file a one-time form to choose this type of method to report their lobbying expenditures. It's the IRS Form 5768 if you're eligible. And I will say that most, I mean, virtually all, it seems like to me, public charities would be eligible to submit this form. An example of a common exclusion would be if you're a church. And this method, it allows you to, it provides a ceiling on the amount that could be spent on lobbying up to $1 million. So it's generally 20% of the first 500,000 of annual expenditures can be spent on lobbying, which if you do the math is 100,000. Then 15% of the next 500,000 of annual expenditures and so on up to $1 million. And then if you exceed this $1 million limit, that's when taxes would need to be paid. One of the benefits for this particular method, I understand, is there's a lower risk of losing tax-exempt status when this method of reporting expenditures is performed. But if you're a very, very large organization, have a lot of expenditures, I'm under the impression that you know, it's harder to, for instance, contain all your lobbying expenditures within that $1 million limit or ceiling. And I did want to point out that if you know you are computing and tracking your lobbying expenditures, you don't need to track lobbying that's done by a nonprofit's actual members or volunteers. Next slide. Private foundations, they can engage in lobbying, but they can fund public charities that engage in lobbying so long as their funding is not earmarked for that lobbying purpose. So earmarking involves conditionally granting money to a public charity and requiring that they be used for lobbying. That's a big no-no. Yeah, this is generally the rule for private foundations. It is very restricted. Next slide. Want to talk a little bit about lobbying by tax-exempt 501c4, C5, and C6 organizations because they're nonprofits as well. If you're a 501c4 tax-exempt organization, for instance, a social welfare organization, this discussion would apply to you. Basically, unlimited lobbying is permitted. and lobbying needs to be related to the organization's tax-exempt purpose. When I think of 501c4s, I really am thinking about organizations that do engage in lobbying. So to me, this really makes sense. And then 501c5s, those would be, for instance, labor, agricultural, or horticultural organizations. And then 501c6s like business leagues, chamber of commerce, and real estate organizations. So I think a good example of this would be a trade association. Unlimited lobbying is allowed for these types of tax-exempt organizations as well. Again, it needs to be related to that organization's tax-exempt purpose. So pretty straightforward. Next slide. I did want to point out that lobbying can mean something different as it relates to lobbying registration requirements. But for purposes of the Franchise Tax Board and the Revenue and Taxation Code, it follows federal tax law in almost every respect as it relates to lobbying, as well as candidate electioneering, which I'll be going into. But keep in mind that if an organization is doing lobbying or it's doing it over a certain amount, there are certain laws like the Federal Lobby Disclosure Act and the California Political Reform Act that would require registration, and those definitions of lobbying would be different than what I've discussed. Next slide. Want to talk about candidate electioneering. Again, I mentioned that this is also referenced as political campaign activity in the Internal Revenue Code. The actual 990, Form 990 definition I thought is very instructive, so I copied it verbatim here. Candidate electioneering or political campaign activity covers all activities that support or oppose candidates for elective, federal, state, or public local office. It doesn't matter whether the candidate is elected. A candidate is one who offers himself or herself or is proposed by others for public office. Political campaign activity does not include any activity to encourage participation in the electoral process, such as voter registration or voter education, provided that the activity doesn't directly or indirectly support or oppose any candidate. I found this definition to be very helpful, so that's why I wanted to share it with you. I hope it makes sense. Next slide. Examples of candidate electioneering. That would be an organization that's endorsing political candidates, running for office, grading the candidates, contributing to a candidate's campaign. And this isn't just money, but mailing lists, non-public information, anything of value, a gift in kind. Soliciting contributions for the candidate or a political party, as well as making statements in support of a candidate or in opposition of them or a political party. And it also involves even just referencing candidates, such as when praising or criticizing them. One thing to be mindful of that would indicate candidate electioneering is using an organization's resources to engage in that type of activity. So, for instance, if you're a person campaigning on your own personal behalf, but you're using your time at your employer's internet access, your employer's printer, that type of information could be attributed to the organization. So that is something to be mindful of. Next slide. Also wanted to talk a little bit about election-related activity that is not candidate electioneering. Again, I encourage you to seek attorney guidance on this. And it's assuming that the content itself is nonpartisan in nature. Voter registration and get out the vote campaigns, voter guides, candidate questionnaires, hosting a forum or a debate of candidates where all the candidates are invited. Or candidates over a certain threshold. The forum covers a wide range of topics, and you're not asking candidates to agree with the organization's position. And there's no campaign materials at that particular event. I have mentioned staff personal activities. That can't be attributed to an actual nonprofit, but that assumes the staff is not using the organization's resources, and it is very clear that the actions are performed in that person's personal capacity. That is very important. And to the extent that you're engaging in issue advocacy campaigns during an election season that are nonpartisan in nature, that wouldn't be candidate electioneering as well. Next slide. So beware of engaging in candidate electioneering. This is actually why I wanted to spend some time on it, because it's an absolute prohibition by 501c3 organizations. You cannot participate in or intervene in any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for public office. This is in the actual Internal Revenue Code for 501c3s. A violation is severe. It can result in a loss of tax-exempt status. And so when you're engaging in activity that's permitted, it's not candidate electioneering, but it's, it's related potentially to an election. It's very, very important to disclaim the organization is not supporting any candidates or political parties, and be careful to not help or hurt a particular candidate when you're engaging in that type of advocacy activity. So again, that's very important. Next slide. During election season, if you're engaging in issue advocacy and you're a 501c3 organization, the advocacy must be conducted in a nonpartisan manner. I repeat that because it's an important point. Organizations should have a real non-electoral reason for the advocacy. It's also beneficial to document the non-electoral purposes in the organization's board minutes, resolutions, and other materials. It's also important when you're engaging in this type of issue advocacy during election season to focus on the substance of the issue instead of individual candidates. And it's also important to not start a new or special advocacy campaign timed around an election. Forgive my phone in the background. Next slide. Wanted to touch on candidate electioneering activity as it relates to non-501c3 organizations, such as the C4, C5s, and C6s. This is permitted so long as the activities are not the organization's primary activity, and the expenses regarding these activities are subject to a tax, the amount expended on the actual candidate electioneering activity performed by these types of C4, C5s, and C6s. Next slide. So I guess that's it. I went over my time period a little bit, but I really hope you found this valuable. It's, again, it's an honor to talk to you about these concepts.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian Gerard. Yeah, wonderful overview just of some strategies that nonprofits can employ. And I think this is something we've talked about in the region before through advocacy training. And yeah, it's great to get this type of information as we're thinking about these longer term strategies. And I think what folks are also sharing curiosity around is, it sort of feels like there's lobbying and advocacy strategies that are baked into the way organizations function. And also wondering, how can nonprofit organizations engage in responsive lobbying and advocacy during urgent moments of crisis? I think, like, for example, with recent immigration raids or the federal funding freeze, how can we take what are some of the legal structures and legal strategies to engage in lobbying and advocacy and apply that to urgent moments in ways that we're being responsive?
Yeah, that's a really good, valuable question. I in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking about is it lobbying? Yes or no? Is there a specific piece of legislation that's being discussed? So like if there is a raid, what's the bill? What's the legislation that's at issue there? And if there isn't anything, I think there's a green light to engage in that type of activity.
Yeah, great. Thank you so
Well,
much.
Could you speak a bit more about what kind of advocacy is permissible in this context then? Or any advice you have?
I feel like as if I'm not the best person to answer those questions because I'm not working at a nonprofit that's engaging in dealing with these particular issues. So I'd almost like to hear examples.
Well, so we can open it up to, we've got folks on the line now. If they have other questions or if they want to respond to the question here about examples, specific examples that you'd like to put forward, we are open to hearing them right now.
One other question that we had come up are around what resources are available for nonprofits to reference as questions come up for them to better understand their rights and responsibilities, thinking about things they might want to share with their board or with their constituents.
Well, I know that the IRS has public materials on this topic. That's something to think about. It goes without saying that there's the ability to seek counsel and legal advice. I actually don't know a good resource for this type of information, but forgive me, I haven't done web research to really verify like, hey, is this something that I would want to share with the board of directors if I wanted to do that for a particular nonprofit. So I can look into that, but hopefully, the materials here provide some helpful, good advice that could be shared.
Yeah, and Kathleen, we've got a growing list of resources in the chat also that include various pages on the Cal Nonprofits website as well as Boulder Advocacy as resources. So I'll encourage folks not necessarily to turn their full attention to the chat box in its entirety, but there will be, and we can gather those up and send them in the post event as well.
So we've
Great.
got a few specific example questions that may be more in line with something that you feel comfortable responding to. So one is, does lobbying for financial support in the budget constitute self-defense?
I think I would be asking there, what's the specific legislation at issue there, and if there is any. I feel like as if when I think of the concept of self-defense, I'm thinking about, say, an organization that's subject to a field audit, for instance, by the IRS, actual subject to an investigation. There could be other examples out there, but that's the first one that comes to mind.
We've got another, if coalitions lobby and or advocate using their coalition name, but this coalition is not incorporated, who is liable?
I'm not sure what is meant here in the context of a coalition. To me, that sounds like a group of actual legal entities. So I would think that the individual members of the coalition could bear some type of accountability or responsibility for the activity at issue. It's hard for me to really say.
Kathleen, do you have another one that you wanted to put forward?
Yeah, one just came into the chat here asking, in regards to the big beautiful bill, was sharing potential impacts of the bill on the neighbors with the neighbors we serve before the bill was passed considered lobbying?
Say that one more time.
They ask, in regards to the big, beautiful bill, was sharing potential impacts of the bill with their neighbors before the bill was passed, would that be considered lobbying?
To me, that wouldn't necessarily meet the definition of grassroots lobbying because there's no call to action.
Mm-hmm.
That's my 2 cents.
Great. And then another one here, I think that this is a pretty good question as well. Someone's asking, can the president of a nonprofit endorse a presidential candidate? And then they added such as a spouse. I'm not quite sure what that part means. But yeah, can the president of a nonprofit endorse a presidential candidate?
In the capacity of as an individual, but not as, say, as the CEO of a particular nonprofit or other organization.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That would need to be made very, very clear that that person is advocating or endorsing that particular person outside of the context of the organization.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you so much. And
so I have one other
yeah,
that came in. It's another specific one that may be relevant to others. Does signing onto a letter with other nonprofits to urge a board of supervisors to put extra restrictions on a county agency constitute as advocacy or lobbying?
So is there legislation in that hypothetical?
The way I'm interpreting it is that they are asking for extra restrictions. So I think they are asking for some policy to be made.
Yeah, if there's not a specific legislation at issue, I don't see that falling under the definition of lobbying.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Again, these are all very specific examples. I encourage you to talk with legal counsel on them. I'm not the definitive answer on these things. I'm just sharing my personal viewpoints.
Great. And just a final question, which hopefully takes it a little bit more general, but what rights do nonprofits have to refuse services to folks who may have bad intentions? For example, we've recently seen instances of self-declared First Amendment observers or auditors that will sign up for programs or folks who don't qualify or align with the services, just considering that so much has kind of changed in the context of, equity and versus merit-based. But yeah, what legal rights do nonprofits have to refuse their services?
Yeah, I wish I knew the answer to that. I apologize. That is a very, very good question. So.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much. And yeah, just really appreciate your time today. And yeah, wonderful information on lobbying and advocacy. Definitely encourage folks to consider that, especially as the 2026 elections are coming up. We'll also be hosting some follow-up training at the Fund for Santa Barbara that dives deeper into what Brian Gerard shared around that compliance with lobbying and advocacy. So thank you so much, Brian. Really appreciate
Yeah,
your
thank
time and
you.
your expertise.
Thank you. And Kathleen, that's a perfect bridge. I'm going to just invite anyone, especially the capacity builders who co-convene today's webinars, to share resources in the chat box right now that can be an upcoming workshop to stay tuned for. I know our colleagues at Cal Nonprofits are also on today's webinar, and there's some upcoming workshops and webinars in that space as well. So hopefully everyone has heard loud and clear that you should be receiving those alerts and that newsletter in particular. Be sure to sign up for it so that you've got up-to-date information as things. I know that developments are changing very, very quickly, as well as feeling like we're all in a bit of a state of chaos. So I think the best way that we can stay mobilized as an industry and sector is to stay informed and well connected to each other. So I want to say thank you very much to our champions and our colleagues in Sacramento. That includes Senator Monique Limón, Brian Gerard Armstrong, also our very strong Association of Nonprofits, Cal Nonprofits, I think hopefully you've all heard that collaboration and partnership is going to be one of those ways that we continue to, demonstrate our resilience as a sector. And that advocacy is not just permissible, but it is our responsibility as social sector leaders to use our voice in ways that matter and have impact. I'm reminded that if we're not at the table doing what we do best, we're likely on the menu. So please use your voice, lift it up, and remember to use your voice in service to our mission. We're going to stay on for a little bit of time. If there's any additional questions from the group, I'd really love it if you've come across an article, if you've come across a toolkit, anything that you can share with our colleagues to help us navigate this particular time, please share it in the chat box, and we'll gather those all up and send it out to our learning community for today. And thanks everyone for spending your lunch hour with us, and we'll see you again very, very soon. Take care, everyone.
Bye. So great seeing everyone.